Okay, the Browns finished their season 7-10. They lose to the Pittsburgh Steelers 28-14. It feels like a really long time ago this happened, even though we're recording on a Tuesday because the news has been so nuts. So the Browns lose. The Browns have since fired Joe Woods. The Browns have had their post-mortem press conference. And, we'll take that in the order I just presented them. The game felt like a microcosm of the whole season, I think, in a lot of ways. There were some good things in that game, and there were some interesting things to sort of be like, all right, that was kind of fun. And then there was a whole lot of not good or just weird or just unpleasant that just made the whole thing just a bizarre game. In this particular case, for reasons we'll get into, that were just incredibly frustrating. But Bree, how do we feel here with our 7-10 record and the performance we saw on Sunday?
And last place in the AFC North, too, to top it all off. Just where we thought we'd be.
Well, all right, let's start there. Do you care about the standings?
Listen, Pete, I told you last week, all I wanted them to do was beat the Steelers. I don't care if that would have put us in third place. I just wanted to beat the Steelers. So to me, it was how the Browns went out. But it's annoying because the Steelers got the last laugh, if you will, right? And that to me is the most frustrating piece of all of this. I told you what I wanted to see from them, and I felt like we got out physicaled, we got out coached. I mean, I'm sure we're going to get into this. The refereeing of this game was so
there it is.
Bizarre. I don't even know what to do with it because it was so bad, but not even just against the Browns, though it felt like the team took the brunt of it. It was just really bad. It was almost unenjoyable to watch that game. Outside of just like what was happening on the field, the refereeing of the game made it 10 times worse, in my opinion.
Okay, so real quick on standings. I don't care. Fourth place in the AFC North means nothing to me. 7-10 means a little something to me. But like the usual suspects trot this out and go, well, the Browns have finished, fourth, third, and fourth in the AFC or whatever.
You're not in first place, you're in last place, right?
Yeah. Well, I think really what it is in the NFL particularly is outside of draft position, it's either playoffs or not playoffs.
Yeah.
The Tennessee Titans are second in the AFC South with a 7-10 record. Like, who cares?
Yeah.
It's the same because it's the same thing. It's like the same people are complaining, well, the Browns are finished dead last in the AFC North are the ones complaining, well, we don't have any banners hanging up. There's no third place banner.
Right. I know.
So that part, I just don't care. To me, it's you're either in or you're not. And if you are the perfect example, the NFC East had a chance to have 4 teams make the playoffs. If the Washington Commanders had not had their season toppled by the Browns, were they going to sit there and go, well, we don't care that we made the playoffs, we're in fourth place in the NFC? It's just the dynamic of how those changes have worked. So that part I don't care about. As far as officiating, I do not buy into the notion that anything's rigged.
Oh, I do.
I know. You and I.
Wait, did you, Pete? It was NFL rigged was trending on Sunday night. Did you see that? I was like, I am all in on this trend. 100% it's rigged.
What I am a believer in is the kindness of officiating towards the Pittsburgh Steelers historically. Yes. There is no team more blessed when it comes to officiating, from the immaculate reception to the Seahawks Super Bowl. That game was just sort of the latest chapter in the fortunate officiating. The only thing I really take away from it where, we talk about the horrific pass interference call that was made on, I'm not even sure who the call was on at this point anymore.
I think it was MJ Emerson, wasn't it?
Well, the Greg Newsome was the one who was in coverage. Grant Delpit came over and helped. And then Greg Gumbel, who had a rough game, calling it, said it was on Tony Fields. So none of them
I think I blacked that part out.
None of them touched the receiver. It was like pass interference. And
I have an uncanny ability, Pete, to just completely zone out announcers. Like, I don't know why. I can just not pay attention to anything that they're saying. And then when you had texted me,
Adam Archuleta is awful.
What'd you say?
Adam Archuleta is
that's what
awful.
You had texted me about. And I at that point was like, I don't even think I've been listening to what they've been saying, which I guess that's a talent that I should be very thankful for. I can also zone out people at work that have really annoying tendencies, like, snapping their gum or like I just like don't notice it.
He just like the previous week, he was the one. Well, the Browns have to run the ball. The Browns have to run the Browns have to run the ball. The Browns were getting nothing running the ball for like the longest. Or it may have been a couple weeks ago, whatever. And then it was like the same thing this week. Even though the Browns were like moving the ball well through the air, and he just kept hammering this, and then like some of the officiating, he's like, "Oh yeah, that's that." Even though it was like clear as day, and then the face mask, happened. They're just like, I don't know what to do with this.
That was a face mask. Okay, I will say, and I know that we're obviously biased as Browns fans, but I did feel like they wanted the Steelers to win so bad. And when Nick Chubb caught that touchdown pass, like it was literally, I was like, did they just score a touchdown? Like, is this not going to stand? Because there was no emotion or reaction in their voice. It was so weird, the whole game.
Yeah, there's a website / Twitter account called Awful Announcing that, again, had a fun day with Greg Gumbel. It was the Njoku touchdown that they picked on. And it was just like, and I saw it live. There were a couple of people who were like, I thought he was having a stroke because he's 75 years old. But he was just lifeless, boring.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I feel like, and I saw this throughout the Week 17 games, it felt like announcers were sort of inherently pulling for the team that had a chance to make the playoffs. And it felt like they were rooting for the story.
Yeah, and I agree, because like they were also clock watching the Miami game, which was also it was 6-6 the like entire game, and they kept you know what I did pay attention to and listen to, though. I had the ability to zone out most of it, but when they were talking about the Dolphins game, I had to laugh because they acted like the Steelers team on the field was paying attention. I'm like, they're not paying attention to this right now. I'm like, what are you talking about? The fans, sure, but the guys on the sidelines, they're not getting updates on this, that the game's 6-6. Like, it was, I think you're right. It was all about the storyline. Everything just all together was very bizarre. Like, what a way to end the season.
Now, my larger problem, bad officiating is dangerous. And I mean dangerous. What happened to DeShaun Watson can't happen. And in that case, DeShaun Watson later said the official apologized. Said he missed it.
Interesting. I did not hear that.
But
was that the same official that fist bumped Mike Tomlin?
That I saw. Everybody made a
Is that real? Like, I saw that snapshot.
Everybody made a lot of that. No, at that point, you are failing to protect players. And after the week we've just endured, unfortunately, everything continues to go well for Damar Hamlin. That's where you go, come on. Like, he totally grabbed his face, could have twisted his head, whatever.
Yeah.
And it the officiating sort of sets the boundary for like how this is going to go. And that is where you sort of go.
People would have been so pleased with that, though, had he gotten like severely injured.
Yes, which that is starting to wear on me.
Yeah.
I'm seeing like, because they're like, people are saying statistically like DeShaun Watson is worse than Josh Dobbs and
I saw that.
And Jarrett Stidham. And my reaction to that is just say you hate DeShaun Watson. I'm okay with that. Like I understand. I can at least understand why you don't like DeShaun Watson, the person. I get it. And he's not played super well. But we're getting to this point where we're just saying things, and what I don't think they realize is going to happen is they're going to end up making him a sympathetic figure for all the worst reasons, because it's not about him being a person anymore. Now it's become this like, it's not about DeShaun Watson anymore. Now it's beating the coverage, beating this sort of national perception, and then like feeding into this whole Cleveland versus the world thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I feel about that, but it's starting to wear on me that we're just like saying, oh, he's awful, this, that, and the other. Like it was the same thing last week where people were like, could not wait to sort of like enjoy the fact that DeShaun Watson did not play well in the first half.
Yes.
And then you see in the second half, they score the 3 touchdowns, they win. It's a big win for them, and like you still see all this stuff hanging out there of like, oh, look at DeShaun Watson, like. So it sort of puts me in an awkward position because like, I get it. I'm not going to tell anyone that they have to like DeShaun Watson. But that part of it just becomes taxing. I think the whole thing is exhausting in a way that, I sort of could tell was going to happen because, I'm trying to be honest to his situation, which we're going to have to deal with here shortly. With the 2 lawsuits that now the season's over. We're going to move into that phase again, which I'm not looking forward to, but it is what it is. We have to deal with it and be honest to it. I think that's the one thing that you and I have sort of discussed and said, look, we like this team. We don't, we were both fans of this team long before DeShaun Watson got here. It's not, it's not sort of his to take away as long as we are honest to who he is or the facts of whatever has or hasn't happened. So that part is starting to be interesting. Now, what I'm curious to see what happens is I have to think that he's very aware of this.
Yes.
One, that he didn't play as well as he wanted to. I mean, he said as much. He said he was surprised at how difficult it was for him to come back. But I think he has to be aware of just how this perception, even if he's not looking up, he's not going Baker Mayfield and looking up specific people like Baker did in college and going after them like that. But I have to think there's this part of him that's going, even though he's a very poised individual and sort of how he carries himself, I have to think there's that little, that sort of spite factor building up to him into leading to this offseason.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think too, he's human and a competitor. We've talked about this before. There's no way he's satisfied with how the season ended, with how he performed in his 6 games. And I do think that will be a motivating factor for him to, again, prove everyone wrong, whatever that means to him, and kind of clear his name in terms of trying to erase some of that off the field stuff or cancel it out with how he performs on the field. Because quite frankly, like if I'm in his situation, that's the smart thing to do, right? Like give people positives to talk about and talk about how good I am at football, because on the flip side, talking about his struggles on the football field almost kind of feed into all the off the field stuff, right? Of like, is that impacting him? Is this going to be something that follows him? Is he ever going to be the same? Like, to me, it's almost as if he doesn't start having that success on the field again, I just think this could compound into mentally having something else kind of be a distraction and or be an issue for him, just based on everything else that he is dealing with from a personal matter standpoint. Like I just think in order for this team to succeed, like they need him to be good, because otherwise I feel like only negatives are going to follow. And I don't think we want both negative football play and then the negative off the field stuff to go along with it. Like nobody wanted this baggage as a fan. It's not a great thing if there's the baggage and then you also have someone that isn't necessarily performing up to expectations.
He's been really interesting in terms of his reflection and sort of how he talks. He talked like a guy who was ready for 13 more games or 11 more games or whatever it was. Like to him, it felt like, I've only played 6 games. Let's go. And I feel it feels like he wants to carry that energy off season. And it was really interesting listening to him saying things like, well, one, he loves Kevin Stefanski. It's getting the only person
is
who
this
loves
forced love?
The only person, well,
is this sincere love or is this forced love?
The only person who seems to like Kevin Stefanski more than DeShaun Watson right now is Andrew Berry. And at one point in that, and we'll get to that,
and me, that
press conference, there was a Jim Nantz, Tony Romo, like almost tickle fight during that press conference. That's always what their broadcast booth sounds like. It sounds like they're literally
for sure
tickling each other in the booth. Anyway,
I can't.
Like DeShaun Watson saying, no, I'm moving here. I live here all full time. That's really interesting to me because DeShaun Watson saying like, no, I have to take over being a leader of this team. And I think living here is a big part of that. Not only because it's obviously a very real statement by him saying, look, this is super important to me. Kevin Stefanski's here. We're going to get to work. But I also think part of that is, when it comes to the offseason, short of, if he's got to be in court or whatever, I think every player who walks into that building to work out during the offseason or whatever, he wants to make sure they see him.
Did he say that he was going? I think I saw a clip of this. He said he was going to plan to be in Cleveland for most of the offseason.
Yes. No, that's his thing. Like, no, he goes, I think it was Jeff Shadell who asked him. He goes, no, I live here now. I'm going to be here all the time.
That's interesting, Pete, because I guess most players tend to go wherever they go. I don't know, like Baker Mayfield.
No, a lot of people
to get out. He couldn't wait to get out of here, right? Into his home in Texas, which like I totally understand. Like when you're not from this area, like I can understand wanting to settle down in a home that you own that you're not living full time in. But I do think that actually means a lot. It's just like, does Myles Garrett predominantly stay in Cleveland in the offseason?
No, he spends a lot of time in Texas. It's really weird because like Jack Conklin, he's here full time. Like he wants to be here full time.
He also has 3 kids. I feel like when you have kids, that also probably dictates a lot of change, because if you have kids in school, like you're not going to pull them halfway through. So yeah, I guess that piece makes sense. I feel like it's the guys that don't have any kids that probably have the flexibility, obviously, to go wherever they want to go.
But I even remember, like, you remember Ben Watson, who was here?
Yeah.
And he had like all of his kids here because apparently that's all you get to do in Cleveland. There's nothing else to do. So, but like that was such a big part. Like there are people who, it's weird because like, there's such this perception, and you've got these people on both sides sort of fighting this, saying, well, Cleveland's a shithole, or they go, no, you go there and you love it. And we have this working out on this team right now, but there are people who like genuinely love living here. Like Joe Bitonio is a guy who lives here full time. Now he will go and spend time out west. He's got family out there, and he'll do some stuff out there, but he's another one that's full time. It's really interesting. But no, that's why I thought it was important and noteworthy to go. DeShaun Watson made it a point to say, no, I will be here, because I do think that's important and symbolic and all that. But again, I do think it's a matter of, some guy goes into the, like Sione Takitaki is going to be rehabbing his ACL. A guy who says, I want to be here. I want to be here. I want to be here. He's going to be rehabbing his ACL. I think DeShaun Watson wants to make it so every day Sione Takitaki walks there, or damn near, he's going to see DeShaun Watson in that building. I think that's part of what he wants to sort of establish. Now, and this becomes important because part of what, DeShaun's off field and all that aside, he has there's an electricity with him, at least as far as players are concerned. We can say whatever we want about him. People are generally excited about him in that building. And it's, you can see it like when he came back and when he got in the building, and you start seeing players talk about it. Even right now, like all these players are like, no, we're really excited about what's going. We know he's going to be good, all this. Now, he has to prove it. The whole thing is riding on this guy, but it's interesting. So I think that's part of what he wants to do. And we're so much of that press conference and everything talked about leadership. DeShaun Watson is making a point to say, I have to be a leader and do all these things. Now, obviously the question has always been the defensive side of the ball, but I think DeShaun Watson is trying to make an effort to be a leader for everyone, which obviously is sort of inherent when you're the quarterback. But that stuff stood out to me. Now, defensively in that
game, back, wait, are you going to go back to the tickle fest? Are you done with that?
We will get there. But I just want to say defensively, it was like a random number generator in that game. There were plays where the Browns were absolutely outstanding and just crushed it. And there were plays where it was just complete mess. And then there were plays where you had some of that going on in the same play. It was, again, a microcosm of the season. And I
was going to say exactly like that literally sums up the entire season.
Right. So like, it was just, the Steelers get the ball, they drive down the field, you make that incredible goal line stop with Tommy Togiai of all people, is like one who has barely played in the last like 8 weeks. Deion Jones out there stripping the ball. Alex Wright recovers the fumble, and you're like, all right, This is a pulse, and
Yeah,
that was
and
another.
like at that point too, Pete, I was sitting there thinking, and I tweeted this. I'm like, things like this don't happen to the Browns. Like they typically don't stop a team at the goal line, force a fumble, and then recover the ball. Like I was like, oh man, things might actually go our way. And obviously I was very wrong. But it was just very nice to see because they held up and then they made a play and it ultimately was a positive. Now, as you mentioned, so many things after that went wrong, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but like that I felt like was going to set the tone for how the rest of the game was going to go, and it just obviously didn't come to fruition.
What I think it did, I think it was indicative of what that defense has been all year. There are times when it can be damn good, despite being undermanned and injured and all this, that, and the other thing. And then there are times where you go from that horrendous pass interference call to giving up a wide open touchdown. And it's like you could sit there and go, the Browns should have been off the field by virtue of that defensive pass interference call. I can't defend that. I can't like sit there and go, well, this shouldn't happen when you just watch the dude. They're most, George Pickens running right down the field.
Yes.
And nobody's there. And like Kenny Pickett was not good in this game.
Okay. Thank you. Pete, at what point did I text you that I was going to start peeling potatoes? Because
this is early because it led to a touchdown.
Second quarter. Yeah.
It led to the first touchdown.
Because I felt like the Steelers' offense in the first half was pretty stagnant. Like I was like, okay, I think this team is very beatable just based on the fact that like I don't feel great about their offense. Mm-hmm. The unfortunate thing was in the first half, our offense was also like not converting. We weren't super efficient. We continue to just get behind the chains with stupid penalties. And so it was just very frustrating to me. And I had to start peeling potatoes because when I get frustrated with watching football, I tend to just do something to distract myself. So I'm busy while I'm also watching the game at the same time. So I had a potato peeler in my hand. I had a weapon, Pete. I was going after the potatoes. Actually, I outsourced the potatoes to my daughter and I started working on the peppers. So I was doing multiple things watching this game. And then we got to the second half and I was done doing all of my distracted things and I was able to focus again. But then I had to like sit there and watch Kenny Pickett not play great, but make passes and make throws that were impactful. And I was like, I'm not about to sit here and watch a freaking rookie quarterback and a rookie wide receiver carve up the Cleveland Browns. And on the other side, like how many times have we been subject to a quarterback that has no business being that good look really good against the Cleveland Browns? And then on the flip side, we have an offense that's supposed to be lethal and so much better than everyone else. And it just wasn't happening. So I was just frustrated. Like I wanted the defense to make Kenny Pickett extremely confused. I wanted him to be scared to throw the ball. I wanted him to be scared of the pressure. And that's just not what we got. And that as a fan is frustrating.
Yeah. He kept airmailing passes early. They were nowhere close.
Yeah.
And he made an incredible throw to George Pickens on the sideline, who made a great play. That was just a great play. Now, it was funny because the immediate reaction was the Browns should have taken George Pickens. The Browns should have drafted George Pickens.
Yeah.
MJ Emerson is right in position. He's great. And that was one of the guys that, by not taking, trading down, you got Martin Emerson. And I'm just certain, like, I understand why people are sitting there. Yeah, George Pickens is really talented. Martin Emerson is awesome. And like, for a rookie who, he made second team all rookie. The guy ahead of him was a 5th round pick by the Seahawks, who's been like out of this world, unbelievable, and Tariq Woolen. But like Martin Emerson has been just good, and he was good in this game. Now George Pickens made that catch and deserves all the credit in the world, but Martin Emerson was perfect in his coverage. It wasn't like he got beat. He certainly wasn't the one who gave up the touchdown. And all this other stuff. So I'm sort of like, I get it. I get why you like George Pickens. I understand he's very talented, but it's sort of like you're shitting on the guy who's doing everything he can and is legitimately outstanding for you. This was a game where the pass rush was just non-existent other than Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett got, that play where, Myles Garrett sort of gets to him and, Kenny Pickett just sort of dumps it to a guy who fights for a first down, which had several officiating mistakes involved. But the first was the fact that Myles Garrett was like held around his head.
Yep.
And then
did we get any holding calls? Maybe one?
I don't know. I don't think so in that one. But then they don't even bother measuring the play. Yeah, they just eyeballed it. And I'm just going.
Once again, Pete, that is amazing because if the situation were reversed, they 100% would bring out the chains for the Browns and they wouldn't get it. So like, I'm just like baffled that these things continue to happen and it's just like normal for the Steelers.
But the whole thing was up and down. Like originally everybody's like, oh, Najee Harris is going to run over us and just kill us the whole game. He finished with 84 yards. Like,
yeah, well, they opened the game with running 5 times straight. And I was like, oh boy. Yeah. Oh boy, this is not going to go well.
Like there was this like, oh, the Browns came out and threw 5 times in a row and the Steelers came out and ran it 5 times in a row. They must be the better team, even though the Browns threw it 5 times and were like good, but they had the penalties.
The penalties shoot us in the foot.
Yeah. So it was just weird because like everything, oh, this is going to kill us. This is going to kill us. And it didn't, but it was just the amount of things that added up. And ultimately you fell short. And it's a shame because the 2 touchdown drives they had were really good. Like they were clean. They're efficient. Mm-hmm. You saw exactly what you wanted to see out of Watson in terms of making good decisions. There were good play calls. The 3rd and 1 play where Jacoby Brissett came in and threw the toss was great. Yeah. They just did a lot of things where you're sitting there going, that's just a smart, good drive. And that gave you some hope. But ultimately, again, they didn't sustain. The Steelers were better in frustrating fashion. There's
why? Why were they better?
Well, the biggest thing, line of scrimmage. The Steelers won. The Browns offensive line, they beat them a lot. They have 3 just terrific pass rushers.
Yeah.
In TJ Watt, Cameron Hayward, and Alex Highsmith. The Browns have 1 who's better than all 3. People can argue with TJ Watt. I'm going to be biased and say Myles Garrett's better, but they had nothing else. Yeah. They would dedicate 2 and 3 guys to Myles Garrett, and then Kenny Pickett would just sort of hang out. And eventually stuff opened up just sort of by hanging out. The other side of the ball. All right. So that was just the biggest thing, which has just been the issue for the Browns the whole year is when their offensive line wins, they tend to do well. But when their defensive line loses, that's the whole thing, which just sort of put it right out there. You said, what does this team have to do this coming off season? Obviously, they made the decision to fire Joe Woods, but you sit there and you go, they need 3 starters on the defensive line. That's the deal. Obviously with the fiasco with Clowney, which is the other thing we have to talk about. I was happy with what they decided to do. I
agree.
I was happy that Kevin Stefanski stayed being Kevin Stefanski. I understand why people want him to sort of go off, but why do you want him to continue to be like to divert from who he is? Like the consistency he has with how he treats these issues is paramount to his trust in the locker room. Like he can't pick and choose when he's going to go out. Now, the thing that made me happy about that was Kevin Stefanski wasn't the one who had to sort of deliver the message. Now he said he was disappointed and, he said the thing like, no one's ahead of the team, all that. But what I wanted to hear and what I got and what, was Myles Garrett saying, no, we're not going to have this.
Yeah.
And he said, I want volunteers, not hostages, and obviously Mike Tomlin has made that phrase sort of his own, even though it's not really his, but it sounds really good. He sounds really good saying most anything. So that's what I wanted to hear. I was hoping I'd hear more of that. I thought it was interesting that the Browns, the other person that was available to the media that day was Jacoby Brissett. He won the sort of the good guy award for, the media and whatever, but he's like he's the complete and total antithesis of Jadeveon Clowney in terms of who he is as a person. Jadeveon Clowney is a selfish malcontent who has always done this. He did it when he came to Cleveland to the Titans. I'm not remotely surprised. He did it to the Browns on his way out. The Texans got tired of his crap and shipped him out for practically nothing. This is just who he is. This is why he's going to be looking for his fifth team. It's always somebody else's fault.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever points he may have had, he undermined by basically complaining that the Browns put the best defensive player, arguably in the entire world, first, in saying, we're going to get him plays. And this is something that people were screaming for them to do all year. It's not, and they weren't doing it all year. They only did it the last handful of games. But it became a really easy excuse to say, well, they're trying to put him in the Hall of Fame or whatever. It just sounded ridiculous out of hand. So I was happy with that. Here's the thing. I don't need Kevin Stefanski to sell me. I need the players to tell me they are believing in what this is. And Myles Garrett sort of gave you he was the one who got to do it since Brissett didn't get asked about this. What's the point? He was the one who sort of set the tone saying, this is who we are and this is what we're going to be. I don't want the coach to tell me that. I want players to say that, because ultimately I don't want the head coach to have to do all this stuff. I want players to police players. When that happens, then the coach doesn't have to. And that's ultimately the best situation for all, when the coach can just, in the same way, originally they didn't say whether Clowney was going to play or not. I hope, my thought when I saw that is saying he wants the players to basically say, we're not going to have this. We don't want him to play. Now, I don't know if that happened or not, but that's what I would like to hope happened, is that like the leadership in that building said, we aren't going to do this. We're not going to have this type of stuff around. And hopefully, the thought process going forward, if you want to sort of criticize or sort of prod the front offices, get me more Jacoby Brissett's and less Jadeveon Clowney's. Jadeveon Clowney unequivocally has more talent than Jacoby Brissett could ever dream of. But Jacoby Brissett makes other people better and will give you everything he's got. And he's a positive influence in the locker room. Jadeveon Clowney is super talented, but always gives you less than what he's capable of and hurts those around him. He's a negative on everybody else. So hopefully that is something that a message or a lesson I hope this front office sort of takes. So the team just sort of looks at this and goes, we don't need this kind of personality or what, however you want to call it.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because there's been a lot of conversation just in regards to culture with this team. Probably more of a talking point for fans and media alike about how the Browns organization just overall has been very poor when it comes to culture. And none of us really know what the culture is like because we're not in the building. We're not on the football team. And so when the Jadeveon Clowney stuff came out at the end of last week prior to this game, obviously this put everyone into a tailspin because it felt like this was, again, just a team that was spiraling and that lacked leadership, that lacked a coach that held players accountable, that let this stuff go on for however long that it was going on and fester. And this, Pete, was all happening after too, which I forget who the coach was after the Cincinnati game, where he came out in his press conference and nobody knew who he was until he spoke with the media. And honestly, it was hilarious when he spoke with the media because I was like, why would you let him speak to the media? But he essentially admitted to
the DB
being harder. Yes. What was his name again? I'm like already blanking. Whatever. It doesn't matter. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. He essentially came out and said that they had planned
Jeff
for,
Howard.
Thank you, all three receivers of Cincinnati to be on the field. And when T. Higgins and I'm already blanking, what's his face went down, then it was almost harder for them to adjust to just Jamar Chase. And so, we had that moment. We have the Jadeveon Clowney thing. All of this stuff seemed to be coming out on the defensive side. We had at the beginning of the season, Myles Garrett with the car accident being out for those couple of games. I mean, there was just a lot of question this entire year around the defense and who are the leaders, what is the culture, and this team just not being great. And it's funny, Pete, you don't hear this stuff out of other locker rooms or out of other teams. And maybe you do. And we just obviously aren't paying attention because we
do. We heard a lot of this out of Pittsburgh early in the year when all their offensive players hated the offensive coordinator.
Okay.
But go ahead. No, I mean, it's always bigger when it's your team. It just is.
Yeah. Yes. It's obviously like put on a microscope. I think, again, a lot of this comes with not winning, right?
Yes.
Because like the Steelers, when that was going on, that was when they lost a bunch of games. So obviously things aren't going to be, and I also forgot to bring up when our defense held a players only meeting after like the second or third game of the season. But anyway, again, I think talking about culture and defining what culture is so difficult, because I think what you hit on is the right way of thinking about it. It's not solely up to one person or one coach to set the tone in the building. At some point, these players need to be held accountable for each other and hold each other accountable as well. Like, I get it. Kevin Stefanski is the head coach. At the end of the day, like, he can only do so much and say so much and set a precedent. I'm just struggling with why it doesn't seem like this team has come together and tried to build that up on their own. And maybe it's because they're missing the right pieces when it comes to having the right guys in the locker room. And some of that has come from some of these free agency signings, like the team turning over. Like, we haven't really had a ton of consistency on defense specifically. So, is that also part of it?
There's a lot here. One, you hit the nail on the head. It's always the defense. Mm-hmm. The offense is a bunch of grown-ups. We just have and we've talked about that. Like Jedrick Wills is in his third year, and we'll talk about Jedrick Wills, is in his third year, and he feels like a puppy out there.
Yeah.
He would be a savvy, grizzled veteran on this defense right now.
Okay.
I mean, that's sad but that's sort of where you're at, is like Joe Bitonio and, Jack Conklin and Ethan Posick.
Even Wyatt at this point.
And Wyatt, who just had, I think his first child or whatever.
Yes.
They're grown-ups. Well, and they have contracts and everything else, but like, they're past this stuff.
Yeah.
They know what they have to do. Amari Cooper is an adult. Like, they have adults on the offensive side of the ball. David Njoku has grown up in front of our eyes on this team. He's in year 5. Yes. We don't hear about this stuff on offense. It never happens on offense.
Right.
It's always on defense. Now, that is in no small part because of how young the defense is. And to your point, and this was a big point, big point of contention in the press conference, talking about, leadership. And it was interesting because, there was this talk about, do you need more vocal leaders? And Andrew Berry said something to the effect of, I'm not worried about style. I'm worried about impact. His answer is fine. I'm sitting there going, okay, I agree with that, but not with this team, because this team is too young. They don't have, they have too many guys that don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
I don't want to pick on Greg Newsome, but like when he did sort of his little exit press conference, he was like pretty positive and pretty happy with where things are going. And that was the thought that came to me. He just doesn't know what he doesn't know.
Yeah.
He's 2 years in the league, and he just hasn't been around. And then you hear John Johnson, and I know John Johnson III is the worst messenger on planet Earth right now for this team, because he's the most wildly inconsistent, unreliable player on the field. Then he comes out and says stuff, you're like, yeah, he's right. Like, and I don't want him to be right, but he's right, because he played on a team in the Rams that was a bunch of grown-ups that was able to go to the Super Bowl. Obviously, he wasn't on the team that won it, but he was on the team that went. So he has real perspective to go, no, we're not right. There are clearly things that are not right here. That is important to understand, because the young players don't know that it's not right, because they don't know anything else.
Right.
So when Andrew Berry says it's about having guys that sort of, you're fine with guys who lead by example, because it's about impact. And I think of that movie, The Other Guys, where Will Ferrell's, what about 9 million people just doing their part? That's exactly what you want on this team. You want a whole bunch of guys that are sort of just understand what they need to do. So you don't need a vocal leader, but not with this team, not with this group of individuals, because they're just too young. They needed guys to tell them, no, you've got to be here. We've got to do this. This is how much work is required. We've got to take care of this stuff. And they didn't have that. And I think that was a real issue for this team. I think it hurt this team. Now, that being said, you're not going to go out and now go get those guys because this year's already over. Now at this point, you're saying, I have to look and see, do I have these guys? I'm going to go sign more players that are hopefully, they're going to be more proven, more veteran, or those things. So I don't need that as much. And that sort of like potentially becomes a non-issue. But for this season, that lack of vocal leadership of here, I'm going to take you, this is what has to happen, that hurt. And I think you saw that in terms of just the youth and inexperience. And those things are really important for this. The thing with Kevin Stefanski, and he keeps saying he is a servant leader, and I don't think people understand what that means. And it's really important because like people criticize him and they just don't understand what he's trying to do. He like talked about it in the press conference, and I think he gives some really good answers because the most successful coaches right now are doing exactly what he's trying to do. He wants to empower people.
Yes.
He wants to give them ownership in this. And he talked about that in terms of Joe Woods and other assistant coaches. He wants to, he wants to give them the ability to succeed, put them in a position to succeed, allow them to do what they do. And on the offensive side of the ball, that's going great. Like you love what you're seeing from some of these coaches who are stepping up and doing these things. And then the defensive side of the ball wasn't good. So you're sitting there, you've got people, well, maybe he should have been more involved. But that goes against everything that he's trying to sell here. Likewise, he wants to empower Myles Garrett to be a leader on this team and to own that stuff. And hopefully you're getting some of this, but he's going to do that with DeShaun Watson. He's going to do that with some of these players that they've established. They're important. So like when it comes to Clowney or some of these other things, I want to hear from the guys who signed 5-year deals because you're sitting here going, you're going to be here. Like this is you have said, I'm going to live here. This is my home for at least this long. Like, what do you want this to be? And they have to be able to do that. And so lead by example is fine if you've got guys that can sort of do that. But that whole conversation is really interesting to me because I think Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski have some really good points, but I think some of the people who are raising questions in that press conference were extremely valid. And I think they made some good points and sort of why I think we saw what we saw. Rolling this over into the fact that Joe Woods was let go.
Yes.
I like Joe Woods, and I thought it as expected. I was not surprised at all to see players sitting there going, they were bummed to see Joe Woods go because he seems to be a good guy who cares about people. That was not surprising to me. Like Anthony Walker, of all people, was like, no, I was not happy to see him go. And obviously some of that is they're not sure how they fit. Anthony Walker says, I hope I can come back here. I like being here and all this other stuff. So that factors in. But again, seems like they thought he was a good guy, even if they didn't think he was the right guy.
Right. And that's fair. So a couple of things. First, I'm nervous. I'll get into that. Second, so we've talked about just the head coaching staff turnover in Cleveland for, 25 years because we've had so many coaches. Now, when we think about defensive coordinators, this is Myles. Will this be his 5th defensive coordinator? Joe Woods was 3, 2020, 2021, 22. So that's 3 years. Steve Wilkes was with Fred. Like, I'm just thinking too about obviously the personnel on the defensive side of the ball has turned over quite a bit, but you do have a Myles Garrett on this team who also has seen the turnover with coaches, the turnover with players. Like that also has to start to wear on you as a player. I mean, obviously for him, he knows he's the best player
I was gonna say
on the defensive side of the ball.
It's like LeBron being worried about who the coach is.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but like, again, like just starting over and, building that rapport, but like, does he have any say in who they hire? Like, I'm just asking that. I'm not saying that he should have a say. I'm asking it because to your point, when you are the best player on the team, do you have a say or do they talk to you about, hey, what are your thoughts on this?
Certainly sounds like he would like some input.
I'm just asking because he obviously has been through a lot of changes in terms of staff, both head coaches, defensive coaches. Like, again, he's dominant. He has remained dominant regardless of who his coach is. So, again, like if you want him to be a leader, if you want to empower your players, I'm not saying they have to listen and they have to hire whoever he likes. But again, even just getting that feedback or talk to him about it, like I think that actually helps him.
Look, I do not envision a scenario where Myles Garrett is sitting in the interview. Let's put it that way. But to your point, but to your point, no, I think there's something to be there. Again, for the same reason we just talked about. These guys have signed 5-year deals or whatever. Like you're saying, these are our guys.
Yes.
So I get it. The standpoint of getting a sense of where they're at or what they feel or whatever, or if they're taping the interviews, letting them watch it.
Yeah.
I don't have any issue with that. Obviously, I don't want to get to a situation where like Kevin Stefanski, no, you go ahead. But you're right. And that's where you sort of get into this thing of where is the line and where is empowerment and where is sort of like letting the inmates run the asylum, so to speak. And that's where that becomes a challenge. But that is interesting. Now,
yeah, and like we talked about this on one of our earlier episodes where you don't want a situation where your players are calling for the coach and then you give in and you say, okay, we're going to fire the coach, because that also can backfire and just be a really bad situation overall in terms of culture and your staff and like the power struggles and whatnot. But I think Myles Garrett is obviously someone who I would want to talk to, and someone who's been through a lot of ups and downs within the organization and obviously a lot of turnover. I don't hate that idea.
Right.
You want me to tell you? You want me to tell you why I'm worried, though?
Go by all means.
So I think as fans, we have to level set expectations a little bit, because obviously the defensive coordinator role is going to be filled. I'm most nervous about the fact that there are so many holes to fill on this defense in terms of who are the starters going to be. That's question and step number one. And how are we getting them? Because from an asset standpoint, I know we're going to have a lot of podcast episodes to talk about this. I'm going to have to
You'll be fine. I promise you will be fine.
But when I think about good teams, Pete, and good defenses specifically, it's not only just the starters that are making the impact, it's the depth. And right now, we, as a Browns defense, we don't even have the starters figured out. So I'm just sitting here thinking, like, I know that Browns fans are like, yes, fire Joe Woods, and new defensive coordinator is going to step in. Everything's going to be problem solved going into next season. And I'm just not feeling that way right now. And I just want to talk through, what does that look like? What should we be expecting? How quickly can we turn this around? Like, is it possible that this defense is going to be really, really good next year? And what does that look like?
Okay, that's a really good question. As far as what do the Browns have on defense, or what do they need to do? They have 5 holes they need to address. Starters. And it's really questions they have to answer. One, the 3 starting defensive linemen. There's just no getting around. They need 3 starting defensive linemen. Now, the thing I would say, you go, well, I don't know, but we need to settle the starters. God knows about depth. They addressed the depth. The depth was adding 3 rookies this past year. That is where, I don't think in any way you can sit there and go, oh, Alex Wright's going to start next year. That's stupid. It's just not realistic. But you do think, okay, he should be able at least more contribute. He played a ton of football this year. And is obviously super young and very raw. Perrion Winfrey played a lot of football this year. Very young, and you can at least see where he's going to have a role. Isaiah Thomas didn't play a ton of football, but he's interestingly the most mature of that group. They drafted those 3 guys. Doesn't guarantee anything, but you have those 3 guys. Now you still got to, again, address the starters in front of them. Middle linebacker, or the Mike backer. It's because of the injuries that befell this team. I mean, we couldn't get through that game without losing one. Reggie Ragland goes down with the shoulder. I don't know if we ever got an answer for that. Anthony Walker lost for the year.
Yep.
Sione Takitaki lost for the year. Jacob Phillips lost for the year. They trade for Deion Jones. I don't expect him to be back, even though I do think that was a good
I liked him. I kind of liked him.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't know what his future holds. It's really weird. Just his situation in general is very strange. He's a very veteran linebacker who's effectively playing with one arm, but he's really athletic and he's really smart. And you get this really mixed bag of at times you're like, wow, that play was incredible. Him getting out there in coverage and making a stop. You're like, great stuff. And then they run at him and you're sort of like, oh.
Well, that feels like he belongs then.
Yes. I mean, like, so that Mike Backer spot, they've got a lot of these things in the air because Sione Takitaka's a free agent. Now he insists he's on a great trajectory in terms of being able to be back for the start of next season. We shall see. Knee injuries are what they are. Anthony Walker talked to the media, but I never got a sense of his injury status. Right. Obviously, with a quad and everything else, you don't know. Now, obviously, part of the reason they signed him originally was because, hey, he's a really good leader, and it hurt to lose
veteran.
him. Now, part of the problem I have with that is it seemed like the whole thing rested on Anthony Walker has to be healthy for the whole season because we don't have enough guys to sort of get through this.
Yeah.
Like that was one of the, and again, like I said, the defensive side of this, I think they set themselves up for failure in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
So Jacob Phillips is technically under contract. I have no expectations for him. So those are three guys right there, or potentially go outside. A lot of that will depend on, who the defensive coordinator is and their health and all this other stuff. So that's the fourth. The fifth is free safety. It is very easy to say, let's get rid of John Johnson. And maybe that's the path they go down. I think it's harder than people realize to replace him. I'm just looking around, whether it's the draft or free agency. I don't see a ton of great options. Now, the defensive coordinator they choose may open that up.
Idea. Yeah.
But those are the 5 spots. Now, linebacker depth, I feel great about linebacker depth because I saw 700 of them play this year.
Yeah.
Now, and to his credit, Tony Fields was a lot of fun this year. He's a very smart football player, and he got better. You sat there, you watched, and you saw him make a lot of plays over the course of the year. I would love to see them bring back Reggie Ragland just to, if nothing else, to sort of be an insurance policy heading into sort of this offseason, assuming that's not a major shoulder injury, till they figure things out. But I saw guys play better football than even some of the guys earlier in the year did. So that was encouraged from that. Corner, they've got corner depth.
Yeah.
Safety, they do not have safety depth. That's the one. And
I was going to say, I forgot Ronnie Harrison even played this year, to be honest with you.
That was a Joe Woods guy. I cannot envision a scenario where he's back. D'Anthony Bell, he's interesting. I don't think he's ever going to be a deep guy. And again, here, the defensive coordinator would be like, I'm not really into that.
Yeah.
But even heading into this season, I sat there and went, I don't know about the safety depth. I just didn't feel confident. It was entirely John Johnson and Grant Dell would have to carry this thing. And maybe Ronnie Harrison would be that third guy when they use 3, and you'd be okay. So that's where I sort of look at it and go, those are the 5 real issues you have to address. And then depending on your answer on John Johnson, it's going to sort of inform your decision on the depth. Is that an unreasonable amount of things to address? No. It can be done and can be done well.
You think?
Yes. For one thing, the Browns, when you look at it and you see all these cap projections for how much the Browns are going to have this coming year, you always see $2 million. The Browns do not have $2 million to work with. They have approximately, because what's going to happen? The contracts they signed with DeShaun Watson and some of these other ones are specifically set up to be able to either convert salary, which for DeShaun Watson is something like $46 million, into a signing bonus, which pushes it all the way down to the end of the contract and creates a whole bunch of cap space. And if you pay attention to Jack Duffin, I know he's British, but he's still pretty smart. The Browns are probably working with closer to about $35 million in this coming offseason. Now, I don't know that they can spend it all because they have to sort of keep playing this game of trying to make their cap bigger to keep allowing them to keep doing this. Browns are paying more than a whole lot of teams on team salary because of the incredibly smart things they've done in terms of managing the salary cap. But $35 million should be able to address what you need to do. Now, you're not going to go out and get, 5 superstars.
Well, yeah. But, and that's the thing that like I also just want to level set. Like I shouldn't say everyone, that's being unfair, but I think a lot of fans just think that the Browns can just go sign the highest prospect free agent that's out there. And like we've talked about this too, like it's a two-way street.
Yes. Now, one, the Browns have never signed big time free agents.
I know.
Other than linemen.
They did. OBJ.
Well, they traded for him, but and he didn't want to come.
Okay.
Well, now
twist the knife, Pete. Twist the knife.
Yes. Now, part of what you can do is if you look, DeShaun Watson opens the door to a lot of things. And I think free agents are going to be one of those things. Here again.
We will certainly see.
Here again, even Steelers players were dapping him up during the game. Like it's like two different worlds. Like
it 100% is. Yeah.
It's very strange. And look, again, we talked about this. What does DeShaun Watson mean if he plays well? Teammates can get more money, play longer careers. That's the deal. Like it's very finite. You can sit there and go, well, I don't want to play with DeShaun Watson because this, and this. But if my, average length of the career is 3 years, you're sitting there going, no, I want to go where I can be successful. And DeShaun Watson opens the door for that. Now, who's really going to be available? I don't know. Like we could talk about Jesse Bates and Daron Payne, and they've got to get away from their teams that they're currently on and avoid being tagged. And then we could talk, but realistically, it's going to be more like middle and, those value type plays that you just sort of add those up. What I just said earlier, you find your a handful of Jacoby Brissetts. If you can do that, you're going to be in great shape. The other part that's going to help with that is if we'll see what happens at the defensive coordinator position. Now, you say you're worried or nervous, and I think that's warranted. But what I found interesting is, almost it felt like 20 minutes after the game ended, the Browns suddenly go, by the way, we're going to interview the murderer's row of defensive coordinator.
I know.
And like all these people are like, we should fire everybody. You're sitting there going, wait a minute. If Kevin Stefanski can get, whether it's Jim Schwartz or they can get Desai or the dude currently in Pittsburgh, like all of these guys are like the guys. And like all of a sudden Jim Trotter, Jake Trotter is going like, by the way, don't rule out Edgero Evero either. And you're just like, Jesus Christ. Like these are like the guys. And look, they could turn it down. They could all say, I don't want to work here. But immediately being like, these are the dudes across the league that everybody would want to interview, that everybody would want to talk to. And you're sitting there going, if it's Kevin Stefanski and Jim Schwartz, or it's Kevin Stefanski, Edgero Evero, and you're all of a sudden, all these people are like, I don't know if we should stay with this. And suddenly everybody's super, super jacked for this new combination. I was just very interested to see how much suddenly 7-10 and all this disappointment suddenly faded to the background. It was like, holy shit, there's a bunch of, because this is how I always looked at this. 7-10 sucked. It was not fun. We sort of knew, those who were realistic about this sort of knew this could happen. And even if they went 9-8, didn't make the playoffs, it was still, yes, it would have been better, but ultimately not making the playoffs was not making the playoffs. But all of a sudden, without, you cut bait on Joe Woods, which a lot of people didn't think Kevin Stefanski was willing to do. And I said he had no problem getting rid of Baker Mayfield. I didn't think Joe Woods was going to stand in his way. To take the quarterback that could not have gotten any more scrutiny than possible. So I see no issue for Kevin Stefanski playing the role of the bloodthirsty tyrant here, trying to do everything he can to win. If he can, bring that in and suddenly you have that juice heading into free agency, it changes a whole lot where all these people are really excited. And like, I've seen any number of people make impassioned pleas for different ones of these guys. It's not like everybody's going around one guy. I've seen people who are super passionate about Brian Flores. I've seen people who are super passionate about Jim Schwartz. And I can easily be swayed to either these. I've seen people who are super excited about the possibility of Jim Leonard. Now, you have not heard his name because there's nobody who has to request permission from. He's no longer with the Wisconsin Badgers. He could just show up anytime he wants and they can interview him. And we probably won't hear about it until then. But like, if it's Desai from Seattle, if it's, all these guys, and my attitude is I don't know who the right one is. I can be swayed into being like, I really like Jim Schwartz. He feels like the most seamless transition versus Brian Flores or Jared Mayo seem more difficult, I guess. But ultimately, all I want, and the reason I say that is because like we do this every year. Everybody will be like, no, this is the coach. They've got to hire this guy. And then because Josh McDaniels was that guy for a whole lot of people. And Josh McDaniels learned all those lessons and processed all that stuff he learned from failing with the Broncos and all this to go take the Las Vegas Raiders job and do the exact same thing he did with the Denver Broncos and suck. We get like 1% of the information I don't, even if you're like, you go, well, this guy's defense with, this team these years was this, and this, and you're going, oh, that's great. Hire him. I don't know what that means as far as his ability to teach or relate to players or deal with conflicts or any of those things. Like, how am I supposed to judge? It's the ultimate guessing game. With Brian Flores, he was great coaching defensively with the Miami Dolphins, but I do have real questions. I would assume the Browns have real questions about what the hell happened between you and Tua Tagovailoa. Right. Because you were toxic. Jacoby Brissett and Tua were awful with the Dolphins. And Tua's now, when he's healthy, has been one of the best quarterbacks in the league this year. Mm-hmm. Obviously, he's not going to be coaching quarterbacks, but it does question what was the nature of the conflict and like how did we get here to sort of, and what did you take away from that? What did you learn from that? Like all those things you want to know. Like, you and I have both been in a position where you hire people. Like these are, it's more than just a resume. You want to sort of get a feel for people and sort of understand how they react to things, what they're trying to do, accomplish all those things. So that part is like really interesting to me. And so I'm not going to bullshit you and go, no, they should hire this guy. I have no idea what the right answer is. What I'm excited about is the Browns didn't say, no, we're going to interview two guys and pick one of them.
Right.
It's like 6 right now. If they get Leonard and if they get Evero to interview at some point, that is what has me excited, because if they're willing to interview and are excited about the Browns job and they get to pick one of those guys, then I feel like we're in the best situation possible. So for me, coming off of 7-10, you have the quarterback you wanted. All of this stuff is sort of set up the way you wanted to. And now you have this sort of new opportunity to hire a defensive coordinator with 3 years of being a head coach in the bank, all the things you learned from that. And now you get to sit there and go with way more knowledge, be able to go, no, this is exactly how I want this to do, to run this organization. This is exactly what I want in defensive coordinator. This is what I need from you. This is what I want from you. What can you sort of do for me? Like all these things. So to me, all this to me screams opportunity rather than we should be nervous. Now, that doesn't mean what you're saying is wrong at all, because it's nervous from the standpoint of they have to get this right this year. They just have to. There's no getting around it. But like, that is where I sort of look at this and I get excited. And I get excited because, in part, because of the press conference. I came away, my immediate reaction for the press conference is those two don't talk enough, because they are really good at it. And they are really good at explaining their vision and why they do the things the way they do them. And when you get really good questions, like some of those, even the ones that were sort of like tough ones about leadership and stuff, they're really good at sort of explaining what they want to do. And you can get a sense. I think they are, like, for critics or whatever, people who actually listen to them, and some people are never going to buy in, but I think people who actually want to listen and see how they operate and the way they sort of view things, I think they are really good at making you feel better about why they are where they are and why they feel better about going forward. I know that was a lot.
That was a lot, Pete. Again, and I know that this was talked about as well, just amongst Twitter after the post-game presser, or what do we want to call it? The sunsetting of the season press conference.
I call it the postmortem, but yes.
The postmortem. Yeah. I like sunsetting. We use that at work a lot. It's funny because press conferences, you don't really get a lot out of them. And or it's really easy to feel hopeful after a press conference. And I myself have felt this way, where I can listen to a press conference and come away feeling extremely confident moving forward. I guess I'm just kind of guarding my emotions overall in just that
I've been hurt before.
I have been hurt before, and I'm not going to fall into this same trap over and over and over. No, but I think in all fairness, I have always been a fan of Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Barry. And I think the two of them, you called it a tickle fight, but there were
a couple. Yes.
They are on the same page and they have that general alignment, which is interesting because Kevin Stefanski was hired before Andrew Barry. Like, if we could go back to that moment in time, it's not like Andrew Barry picked Kevin Stefanski as his coach. So again, like that whole thing is interesting. However, they are obviously very like-minded in terms of just how they operate and their mindset, whether that be analytics-based or football-based, which is a topic for a different day. But I don't know, Pete. I think I'm just going to be a little bit more guarded. I am excited about the list of the defensive coordinators. And from what I saw out there, I hope that whoever the Browns decide to hire, like, I just really hope it works out. I hope that they are able to figure this thing out and that we don't see a long transition into getting this defense corrected and right, because the last 2 years, specifically with Joe Woods, this defense has not come out of the gate strong. And it's been like a slow trickle effect of the team improving while still not being consistent in terms of a unit. So I know we were talking about this a little bit yesterday, but I'm intrigued about hiring a defensive coordinator that had head coaching experience before, just in a sense of having another person there that's been through a system and a team where they were leading training camps. They were setting up like what that conditioning looked like, what their off-season work looked like, because Kevin Stefanski, again, like just wrapped up his 3rd year, but like also still very new to just head coaching in general. And like, is he getting all of those things right? Like, I don't know. Like, he obviously was with the Vikings for a very long time and has probably taken a lot of what he's done here with the Browns from what he did and what he learned and what he was involved in during his time with the Vikings. But like, I also think it's very good to have different mindsets and different points of view on how they should be running things. So I don't think that could be, I think that could actually be a benefit of having a defensive coordinator that also has some head coaching experience behind them. Just from an overall, like, how are we going to manage this team, different thought processes, and just like another shoulder to lean on, because Kevin said this, like, he is a servant leader. He wants to empower the people that work underneath him. So I think out of all people, he would be very open-minded into taking different feedback and incorporating them into what he is doing as a head coach.
Yes. The two former head coaches that are on the list are Jim Schwartz and Brian Flores. And I agree with you. That element is very appealing, particularly with what I know of Jim Schwartz. He is a disciplinarian. I think Brian Flores is as well. And because we've talked about how the offense and defense on this team are very different.
Yes.
That is appealing, that you could potentially have somebody like Jim Schwartz or Brian Flores come in and go. In that sense, you can sort of look and go, even if the Browns won that game and shut out the Steelers, you could sit there and go, okay, but all these issues are not going away. I don't like the fresh voice element as an excuse, but I do think it's valid in this case of now saying Kevin Stefanski can say to whoever, you get to set the tone for how this is going to work in terms of discipline, in terms of accountability, in terms of those things. And like, and here again, Kevin Stefanski offers the ability to empower that side of the ball. And, this sort of reminds me of Sean Payton, which is never going to happen, nor should it, who empowered Greg Williams with the New Orleans Saints to the point where they set up Bounty Gate, and Sean Payton claimed he didn't know about it. But that's sort of like what can happen. that's obviously the ultimate downside of it.
Yes.
But I think the upside of it is that, like, if it's Brian Flores, if whoever it is, that they get the opportunity to say, I'm going to run this my way and establish what needs to happen, because that side of the ball needs more of that.
Mm-hmm.
That is where I'm curious to see how that would go with Myles Garrett, because he could either be like, yeah, this ain't for me, or he could be like, no, we need this. We absolutely need this. And he can do this. I don't have to. Yes. In a way that now it allows me to do that. Now, the other part of Kevin Stefanski being 3 years in this, he's probably got a better handle of strengths and weaknesses. Mm-hmm. In other words, he understands what he can do well, and he may be able to find the yang to his yin in terms of what he needs from that room and that side of the ball, in terms of, one, not only holding that group accountable and making them sort of operate like a well-oiled machine, but maybe pushing him a little bit in some of the ways you said, like in terms of how he wants to organize practices or whatever. Now, I'm curious to see how that sort of goes, because obviously, we've heard from players that they like the way they were sort of treated in that regard, but I don't know if that's the optimal.
Yeah, exactly.
But so those are conversations I'm interested to have. That's where I would love to be a fly on the wall and sort of listen to those things and hear that, because that's the thing which I enjoy about these press conferences. When you ask these guys process-oriented questions, they give great answers. They will talk to you all day. Not how much more talent do you need, which is my favorite question of all time in a press conference. I was hoping Andrew Berry was going to say, how much more talent do you need, to ask a better question? But he's so much nicer than I am and said, it was very diplomatic. But like, when you ask them stuff like that, when you ask them stuff about like leadership, and you're not saying, hey, do you think Jedrick Wills sucks? It obviously didn't come out like that, but that was sort of the,
yes.
Then you sort of put them in a situation they can't answer you.
Yes, exactly.
And even the one that was like the clumsiest question of all, which Daryl Ryder asked, and I could totally relate to this because you just sort of ramble. And initially, he's sort of like, "Do you feel like you have enough assets to sort of address all the things you need, or do you feel like maybe you're in a bigger hole than you thought you were?" And then ended up asking, "Do you think you need to trade up into the draft?" Which,
oh God,
which is early for me. That's early for me. The national championship happened later. That was the national championship happened that evening. The early declaration day is in a week. Like, we're talking about the draft. And to Barry's credit, he was just sort of cut through the bullshit and was like, no, we have all the assets and picks and everything we need to address these things. So like, that's where I say you get into some of those questions, like, the Browns, started doing the whole analytics element in 2016, and yesterday, Barry's still answering questions about analytics. I know. And it's just like, what are we doing? But that's also why I think they need to do more of this stuff. Now, my personal opinion is they should come on this podcast and talk. But I do think there's a value to them.
Hey, we have a connection.
Yeah, we should talk about that. That I do think there is value in them going around and talking to people and not necessarily about analytics, because that's so stupid. Like, it's so simple to me to be like, hey, how you get in your car and you drive and you read, hey, there's the gas gauge. I know I have this much gas left, and there's a speedometer so I don't go too fast or whatever. None of these things, these are all valuable things that are analytics. None of them are driving the car. Like that, it's that simple to me. And yet we make this into,
listen, Pete, you don't have to preach to me. I work in a job that relies on analytics heavily to make decisions, while also understanding that I'm able to make decisions on my own. I just use analytics to help me make the right decision. Right. So it's just,
it's information. It just tells you stuff.
It's supposed to be helpful. It's not supposed to cause people to fight on Twitter. Like, it really isn't that big of a deal.
And then some of the other parts is because of the nature of a press conference, it's such a grab bag that there were a couple times where, like, Andrew Berry was asked about leadership or whatever, and he got into that whole thing about, styles and all that, and but then he went into this thing where he, talked about not having the right mix. I really wish there was a follow-up to that question, and we didn't get it. And that's the other part where I think, whether it's this podcast, or sitting down with somebody, a columnist or a reporter or a radio show or any of these other things, they are their best advocates by far. They are really good at talking, and they're, it's not like John Dorsey where you were sitting there going, please stop talking. You are awful. And you are doing
and Freddie Kitchens.
Yes. Where you are just doing a horrendous amount of damage, like taking, hitting David Njoku with strays at the combine for no apparent reason. Like, these are not that guy. They're really good at talking. And I think when they are engaged and like interested in what's going, like the conversation, I think they provide some really helpful answers. And like, those are the things, like, I really enjoy the process, questions and answers. Like, they talked about DeShaun Watson. I would have been curious to continue hearing about more process as relates to him and some of those things. It's tough because you get this, and that's what makes those questions so infuriating. To like, you only get so many, especially with Andrew Berry, you only get so many opportunities to hear him talk or answer questions, and like you waste them on some of these things where he's like, even other people in the room are sitting there, they can't do it, but they want to groan because people are trying to like pick a fight, and it's not productive, and they are really trying to help you out with the best answers they can possibly provide.
Yeah, I have nothing else to add to that, to be honest with you.
Nothing
else to add to that. Nothing else.
So look, I mean, the last 3 days, Sunday, Monday, and now Tuesday, the Browns have sort of set the table for what is a lot of work. There's no getting around the fact they have a lot of work to do. They obviously got to hire the defensive coordinator, and they've got to start figuring out how they're going to approach some of the free agents. I mean, obviously they have other coaching questions they got to figure out within the staff. They were non-committal on Mike Prefer, and a lot of people were right into that. Fine, whatever. I think he was just trying to be as diplomatic as possible. He didn't want to like say, hey, this guy's staying and this guy's, I'm not sure about this guy. We'll see. Those things will get sorted out.
Yeah.
Then you head into the offseason, and it becomes, first and foremost, maximizing DeShaun Watson. What is this offense going to look like? I think we saw 6 weeks of them throwing a whole lot at this team and trying to get as much information as possible to sort of help get a sense of what DeShaun likes, what he doesn't like, what could work, what might not work. And then now they're going to sort of really figure out what that's going to look like heading into next season. Free agency, the draft, all that stuff's a long way off, but still nevertheless interesting. And then, there are a couple big old meatballs hanging out there in terms of contract extensions. Are they going to talk to Donovan Peoples-Jones about getting locked up? Are they going to talk to Grant Delpit, given how he finished the season, about possibly extending? We don't know the answer to those things. It seems like Donovan Peoples-Jones is going to happen, but who knows with Delpit? He played really well down the stretch, and I have found him to be, after that Patriots game, one of the more engaged, passionate, professional players on this team. Even in that horrendous Saints game, he was still out there playing his ass off, which I found very endearing. Obviously, the interceptions, he has 4 of them this year, which led the team. Some of those, I think all 4 were basically luck, but I do think the 14 plays he made on the ball are up from 4 the previous year, are indicative of him doing the things that he needs to do to improve in that position. I'm curious to see where he goes from this, if he's going to take on more of a vocal role. But yeah, there's a lot to discuss. So many mock drafts for Bree to do. No, honestly, there's plenty to talk about over the coming weeks. And I think Bree is going to be far more fine than she thinks she is on some of this stuff, because ultimately a lot of it just comes down to, it's a people business, and
we'll
find the right people. People on YouTube, you're awesome. I don't get it, but it's been great. I think we had it's always weird because YouTube has a weird, will tell me a bigger number and then shrink down. But I think we were over 1,900 listens on YouTube this past week.
Hey, keep it up, people.
Which is awesome. Grateful for that. Tell friends. We will still be here during the off season. Obviously, that may change for how some people listen. Hopefully the people who are sort of into the not too high nor too low are sort of continuing to be interested to see where this team goes, because to me, like I said, and I'll sound like a homer here, I am genuinely excited about the coming off season, because I do, like I said, I think it is nothing but opportunity. Even if you're Kevin Stefanski and you're looking, I've got 1 year at this and I've got to figure this out, it's still an opportunity for him to go, I'm going to do this exactly how I want to do it, with the quarterback I wanted, with the defensive coordinator I now get to hire, and all these things. And if it works, we're going to be thrilled that it worked. and we get to see this thing through. But with that, we will be back next week. We may have a defensive coordinator by then, but who knows? But either way, we'll be back one way or the other, and we will keep talking our way through this thing.